Alright, so for this next assignment, we're going to be creating something along the lines of this center console area. We're not going to do this exact one, but just so you get an idea of what the area that we're going to be going for in here. And I'm going to kind of wing the design, but keep in mind that if you were doing something like this, you would have drawings or pictures or something that you would be creating this stuff from, most likely. So there's a lot of different ways that things are kind of created in the car. We're going to go with a very simple method, as this is going to be your first introduction to using the tools that we're going to be using. All right, well, let me view that image, whatever. We're probably most likely going to be going with the stick shift, just because I like the kind of design that we can add in here and the look of this compared to something like that. So they obviously have like fancier stuff like digital displays and all that. So we're going to kind of take it step by step. It's not going to be a terribly long assignment. But there's a lot of different things that we can include in here, and it's like wide open to how you want to interpret that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Project Window, make a new project, make sure it's set to my D drive, Sarcona 2510 work folder, and I'm going to call this Car Center Sarcona. Car Center Sarcona. Hit accept. Okay. Now before we start working on this, I'm going to show you some of the tools that we're going to be using. Okay. The first tool we're going to be using is under the Create menu is this CV Curve tool. Okay. I'm going to go to my front view, right view, top view. Never perspective view when you're using the curve tool. So you have to be in one of these views, or you should be in one of these views in order for this to turn out correctly. So I'm going to go to my right view, and I'm just going to show you how this works, okay? So this is basically I'm creating a point. So I just clicked, and I can drag, and it created that point. I'm going to click and drag and create another point. Okay, right now I don't have a curve. All I have is 2 points. I'm going to click and drag and create another point. Now I have 3 points, but still no curve. Once I click the 4th point, then I get the curve, okay? In Maya, this kind of curve, which is a cubic curve, is based on the positioning of 4 points that kind of keep everything in line. So once we have 4 points, then we can get that kind of thing. So then I can click another point and get that, another point and get that. It's going to take some time to get used to just drawing this way compared to using the Bezier inside of Photoshop or Illustrator. There is a Bezier curve tool, and it works pretty much like the other one does, but it's a different kind of curve. Okay, so I like to just avoid using Bezier curves. I like to just stick with the CV curve tool. It gives you a more realistic expectation of what to expect when it converts it into a surface. Okay, so just kind of like our polygon stuff, if we wanted to create a very open curve, click a point, click a point, click a point, click a point, you can see how big that curve is here. Okay, if we want to create something a little tinier, I'll create it right here. I just bunch these points together, and then I've created this tiny little curve like that. All right, so it's nothing crazy. It's just going to take some time to get used to using this feature. Okay, now what we don't want to do is just like a Bezier, is we don't want to have this kind of shape in here. This is a ridiculous amount of points in here. You should focus on keeping your curves controlled to the point of needing just exactly what you need. Okay, and if you try to create this and then you try to edit this just like a Bezier, it's going to take you a very long time to do something like that. Okay, so there's CV curve tool. That's the one we're going to be using. Okay, and this is what I use for curvy tools. That's not what the CV means, but I want to use for curvy tools, curvy curves. And this EP1 I'll use for straight lines, because this one I only need 2 points and it'll create that curve. Okay, in either case, when I'm using the CV or the EP curve tool, if I decided that I made a mistake, I can hit the backspace key and undo that point. Or if I realize this point is in the wrong spot, I can use the middle mouse and move it to the right spot. Okay, I can't middle mouse one back here because I'm only on this one. So I can hit the next point and just click and create them. Okay, beautiful. If I needed to get rid of the entire thing, I could just hit enter to complete the curve and then delete to delete the curve. Okay, and then just get back to the curve tool and draw my next shape. Enter to complete it, done. Okay, or if I needed to, backspace to undo the points, and then we get there. Okay, so that's the CV curve tool and the EP curve tool. In each one of these, the boxes, I could actually go in here and set my settings to linear, and then I have a curve with only 2 points. Okay, or I could set it to a 2, but typically you work in either 1 linear or 3 cubic. And I like to keep my CV curve tool as cubic, and then my EP curve tool, I like to keep that one. Oh, it's set to cubic. Oh, it's still cubic. But it's still cubic, but this is a different type of thing. Now, just so you can see this, okay, I created a CV curve, but if I right click on it, I can go to Control Vertex, which is what the CV stands for, or I can go to Edit Point, which is EP. So CV or EP. And I can edit them after the fact. I don't like typically to use EP to draw my curvy ones because as I edit this one point, it affects things way down the line. You can see as I'm moving this point, how this over here, let me change my background and hide my grid, how that point down there, that line down there is being affected by it. Okay, if I right click and go to CV, here's the CVs. As I move this, it's only affecting the stuff here and the stuff here. It's not really affecting anything crazy far down the line. So I feel like I have more control over this type of setup. Okay. Now, because we're basically creating these points from scratch, or these surfaces from scratch, there's a couple things we have to keep in mind. Let me zoom in so we can see this a little better. That should be good. All right, if I'm trying to create a nice rounding here and making this look continuous, I have to use my snapping. So I'm going to hold down X, and I'm going to snap one point right to this grid marker right here. Okay. Now if I click over here and I go down like this, let's just say I do that, and I'll hold down X and I'll snap it there. Up here I'm going to get a peak. Okay, I'm going to get a point. Down here I'm going to get a point. Okay, I can get rid of those points and make it look a little bit more fluid if I just make sure that my first 2 points are in line and my last 2 points are in line. Okay, otherwise what we'll actually get is a very, very harsh surface. Now you can see that this looks pretty blocky. If I hit 3, that will help smooth it out. Okay, with a NURBS surface, when we hit 3, we're getting what the actual surface would render like. If we hit 1, we're getting a preview of what the, or not a preview, but a lower res version of what the NURBS surface would look like. Okay, so if I'm at 3 and I go to Control Vertex and I grab this point and I pull it down, you can see how this is coming up to a point here. I want this to be in line with that one, and then I'll create a nice little arch right here that will carry over for the rest of my surface. And the same thing down here. You can see in this case I've actually gone too far. I need to make sure this is perfectly lined up. Okay, it doesn't matter where these points are. I mean, obviously for the shape it will, but it's not going to hurt the top or the bottom of the surface as far as making it look like it's a continuous surface. Okay, so sometimes when I draw these, I'll use X to snap my first point, and then I'll use Shift to click the next one. That way we go in a straight line. And then I draw whatever shape it is, something crazy like that. And then for my last 2 points, I'm going to use Shift X to go here. That way it goes, in this case it's going straight down and snapping to the grid, and then I'll use X to snap there. So now I guaranteed that these 2 points are perfectly in line, and these 2 points are perfectly in line. And some of the tools that we're going to be getting into are going to take these kinds of things like this, and under Surfaces Revolve, this should already be set up. Should reset it. It'll create this kind of shape here. Okay. Now, if I don't have those points at the start or at the end in line, you can see how I'm going to get this little peak that's inside here, and it doesn't look like it's a fluid surface anymore. Okay. Or if I go to the bottom, this looks like a nice fluid surface. It looks like it's closed. Okay, even though it's not, I pull this open, it's not closed, but it looks like it is. That's the trick to it. I wonder if I'm a little bit off. Go back to the side view. Oh, I'm right on. It's just a little bit tight there. That's all. Okay. All right. So we can create some very cool shapes. We just have to keep those couple things in mind when we're drawing our curves. That we want the first 2 points. Where's my grid? There it is. We want the first 2 points to be in line, and then we can do whatever. And then the last 2 points should also be in line, okay? And they should also be in line with this black line down the middle. I don't want to draw it way out here. Okay? Even if I created these 2 points in line here, okay? If you look at where my pivot is, look at my pivot's way over here now. So when I go to revolve this one, you can see the kind of shape that it gives me. Okay, I can fix it by moving the pivot, but it's just much easier to keep everything kind of modeled around this axis here and then putting it into position. Now, sometimes I'm not going to do that, but just keep in mind that that's the goal of this, is to do as many of these as we can right in there. Okay, so that's the CB curve and the EP curve. Under NURBS primitives, there is a circle and a square. This circle is merely a CB curve that has already been created in the shape of a circle. The square is a curve that has been created in the shape of a square. Now, if I look at this and I click on one of these edges, you'll see that these edges are no longer, or not connecting. Okay? And that's just how it gets created. If I go to the outliner, you can see here are the 4 pieces of the square, and then here is the group that's kind of housing that square. All right? So a lot of times we'll start off with a square just because here's a good shape we can start off with and then develop it from there. Okay? A lot of our tools we're going to be using are going to be under the Surfaces menu. Okay? Edit Curves, Surfaces, and Edit NURBS. These are going to be the top 3 things we'll probably be playing with a lot. So in here, let's say I'm going to start off with this kind of surface, and I wanted to create a nice little rounding. You know, just like in a polygon, we don't want to have stuff just kind of like really square. We want things to be rounded off. So if I take these 2 edges, or these 2 curves, and I go to Edit Curves, I can do a couple things in here. The one I'm going to do is Curve Fillet, or Fillet. It depends on how you want to say it. Okay, I like to say fillet. All right, so Curve Fillet. Default settings do not have trim on, so I want to make sure I click trim on. And I also want to take my radius, and this is going to basically be like our bevel and polygons of how big that cut is going to be. So it's going to be relative to our scale. Right now, this is 1 unit from here to here. So if this is left at the default of 1, I'm probably going to have this big arch that's going to cut in here. So I know I'm going to have to go further down, so maybe 0.1 would be good. Okay, and typically these are the only options I play with. Trim, 0.1, done. Okay, so fillet, and you can see I have a nice little fillet right here. If I go to my outliner and I open this up, I still have my 4 curves, and then now I have this new fillet here. If I grab my NURBS square and I move it, you'll see the fillet's going to go with it. If I grab one of these edges and move it, oops, the fillet goes away. Okay, it's still listed here, but it goes away because I've broken the connection there with the history. So I have to make sure if I want to keep that I delete the history. Okay, and when you delete the history, don't right click on these buttons, just simply left click, done. History's gone. Okay, now if I click on this and move it, you see there's no connection there. Okay, so let's do these two, just so you can see the process. Curve fillet, trim, options are already set. There we go. So if I want to do all four of these, I can just marquee the next two, hit G, marquee the next two, hit G. So now I've taken this square and I've just created this nice round cornered square instead. Okay. So with this shape, you see that if I click on one of these pieces, how this turns pink or magenta, that means that there's some sort of connection to it, some sort of history in how these things are being used. So that's just my indicator that, you know, something is being used with the history. So I'm going to marquee the whole thing. I'm going to delete the history. Okay, now if I grab this square and move it, you see that I don't take my fillets with it. I could grab the fillets here and middle drag them into the square, then click the square and then move the whole thing. But this really doesn't give it, it's still not one piece. Okay, even if I grab it like this and move it, you know, it's acting like one piece, but it's not really one piece. All right, we want this to be one piece. So under Edit Curves, there's also an Attach Curves. So that's what I'm going to go to. And the default options for this is set to Blend and Keep Originals. I don't know why Keep Originals is a default. I hate Keep Originals. I always turn it off. Okay, when I say always, obviously you want to make sure you don't need it. But typically it's going to be turned off. And then in this case, we're going to use Connect. Okay, so Connect, Keep Originals off. I grabbed all of them. I'm going to hit Attach. Okay, so now what I should be left with is one curve. As I move this one curve up, you see it doesn't obviously work. Okay, again, because of history. Delete the history. Now I can move it up. Okay, now for some reason, even though Keep Originals is off, it still keeps the originals. So I delete those. So now we have this guy who is a solid single curve all by himself. Beautiful. And then we can do stuff with this kind of thing. Okay, so I could take that and I could go to, let me duplicate it first and pull it up. So I'm going to grab both of these and I can go to Surfaces and I can say Loft. Okay, now this gives me just a surface between those two areas. Okay, now here's where a loft is handy, is that let's say I had 3 of these. And this guy in the middle was just a little bit fatter. Surfaces, Loft. So now you see how I've created this kind of stretched out box in the middle. And I can obviously scale that out or in and adjust it. I can grab the curve up here and adjust this way and adjust that one that way. Sometimes it's easier to select these things inside here. Okay, I could even rotate them. And there's no limit to the amount of curves that I could do this for. My only stipulation is that they should be all the same amount of divisions in there in order for this to work correctly. Okay, and what I mean by that, let me delete these, go back to my original and just kind of reset this. What I mean by the same amount of divisions is if I right click and go to Control Vertex, you can see how many points are on this thing. Okay, and if I go back to Object Mode and I hit Control A, and I look for my attribute editor, modeling tools. All right, let me just reboot Maya and get my attribute editor back. All right, it's probably a good time to show you this as well. Sometimes when you work at different screen resolutions, like you're working at the college and you're working at home, and you open up a window and you move it to the second screen, which is what I did, and then you save your preferences, that position of that window is saved. Okay, and the only way to get it back is to go into your Maya preferences, go to your preference folder, and inside here is the window prefs. I'm going to edit this with Notepad. And in here are all the different positions of all my windows. So if I look for the attribute editor, which is going to be not listed in here for some reason. It's weird. I might call it something else. I don't know. But anyway, all I have to do is delete that. Okay. Then I reboot Maya, and then all my window positions get set back to their default position. I'll go back here, open up that file. There's my attribute editor. See? All right. So now if I click on this, you can see my spans here are 22. My curve degree is 3. Okay. My curve degree being 3 means it's going to be smooth, just like when we went to the curve tool and we chose 3 here, or we left it by default at 3. Okay. So this gives us some details about this thing. Now, if I were to take this, let's say I duplicated it and I went to edit curves and I said rebuild curve, and I said, okay, instead of 22 spans, I want to have 70 spans. Okay, I could even make it linear. Okay, so now this guy has 70 spans. If I right click and go to control vertex, you can see the amount of points. This guy has 22. Now, will this operation still work? It'll most likely still work unless Maya's acting goofy. Loft. Okay, and you see that there's not a huge issue between any of these things. And if I go to control vertex, we're still kind of have the points pretty much managed. All right, but sometimes you will get funky results, especially if they don't line up. Like the simple act of me taking this center one and rotating it 90 degrees, even though this shape hasn't changed. Let me go to Loft again. See, even though the shape hasn't changed, you can see how this is now acting kind of funny. Okay, just by rotating that one 90 degrees, these are basically in the same position. Okay, and the reason it's doing that is because if I go to, I'm going to hit F8 instead of right clicking because I want to see all the points. If I hit F8, you can see on this curve, all the points look like these little solid squares, except for this little clustering right here. And this clustering is basically the start of our curve. And if I pull this apart, you can see that it's broke. Okay, and that's going to be a case for all of them. Okay, and then this U that's right here is kind of the direction of this thing going. So that way we know where the start of this curve is. So on this guy, his start is actually way over here. So it matches up. Here's the start point. Here's this start point. Let's connect those. Here's this U. Here's that U. Let's connect those. And then it does some way of interpolating the rest of these to connect the rest of those. And then it's going to do the same thing on this upper one. Okay? So let me take this top one and rotate that one 180. And if I did a loft, okay, we're doing the same kind of thing where it's just getting really confused as to what we want out of this whole thing. And even if I grab this afterwards and rotate it, you can see I can get it to some point where it looks okay, and then it just kind of like freaks out. Okay, even though it should be able to just kind of figure that out after that, it doesn't like to do it. Okay, so sometimes you'll need more of these, and realistically you want to keep the divisions as close to, if not exactly at, the same amount of points as the original. Okay, that's just good practice to keep the same amount of points there. Okay, and the same spacing. If I were just to duplicate that shape and I did a rebuild on this, I put in 22 divisions and then I said reduce. Okay, you can see this one has 22, but they're evenly spaced out. This one has 22, but they're condensed in the areas it needs them and spread out in the areas that it doesn't. Okay, this will still work most likely. Okay, but I get this kind of funky result. All right, it's not pleasant to look at. And even if I took this and said, okay, let me go rebuild this again and I'll make it cubic this time. Okay, I don't really get that shape back in there. Okay, because it doesn't really remember the shape and it's kind of still trying to keep these uniform. All right. So just some things to keep in mind as you're creating these kinds of curves. All right. Now there's also, under the surfaces menu, there's another one that we're going to deal with. There's a planar. Okay, and that's planar. That's all it does. It just kind of fills in that space. So if we duplicated this and we lofted these two together, and then we said, okay, well, we need a cap now. I can go to surfaces planar and cap that off. Okay, Now, this kind of shape here, you're looking at that saying, okay, why did we go through all this trouble? Wouldn't it be easier just to kind of create a polygon and then just put a bevel around the edges? And yes, it would be in this case, but some of the other things we're going to be doing are going to be a lot easier to do in a NURBS surface compared to a polygon surface. Okay, so that's what the planar is going to do. Now, planar is just like most tools in Maya, it can be a little bit finicky. Okay, so if I go in here and I grab my square and I rotate it, it's going to work. Okay, if I delete this, grab it, and go to planar, okay, it's still going to work. But if I grab any one of the points on here and I move any one of the points, even a microscopic unit away, there we go, it stops working. Okay, in order for planar to work, it has to be flat, it has to be a plane, and me moving that point even that tiny bit away makes it not work. Okay, so I'm going to flatten this out just so we can see this again. If I go to control vertex and I grab one of these points and I move it up a tiny bit, there it goes. Okay, it goes away. I can move it this direction, no problem. I can move it that direction, no problem. It's when I get into the Y direction that's breaking the flatness of that curve. Okay, just so you can exaggerate it. You see how we have this big bump here? It doesn't like that. It gets confused. It doesn't know what to do. Because a planar wants to be flat. It wants to be a plane. Okay, so that's what planar is going to do. So we just have to make sure that if we do have a surface that is kind of wonky with a lot of divisions like this, where we just have things going in different directions, and we want to create that plane, we have to flatten it out. And sometimes I'll go to the scale tool and just scale it down in the one direction until that plane pops back in. Okay, so that's planar. There's another one under here we'll be using, which is extrude. And extrude has several different ways we can extrude. Okay, for now we're going to keep this using distance. I don't think we're going to use any tubes for this specific assignment. So with distance, we specify the extrude length, and then we can specify an axis if we wanted to. Okay, so let's say we're going to use this. I'm just going to hit extrude, and now we've created this extrusion here, kind of like a polygon extrusion, but it's extruding that curve along there. So if I come into the options for this, I can take the rotation up and twist it and create some interesting shapes. Kind of looks like a Twizzler. I can take the scale down or up. I can take the degree down, and what the degree down is going to do is make this more of a faceted look. You can see as I get in here how we have these like flat areas. If I take this up to 3, now we have smooth areas. Okay, and if I take this original curve and I move it, you can see it's going to move that whole thing with it because of our history. Okay, there we go. All right, so now I can take this and go back to the options for extrude. Now if I go to specify instead of profile normal, I can specify an axis. Okay, and I can specify either the X, the Y, or the Z as to which direction I want this to go. All right, and let me show you the reasoning for that. Is let's say we were on an angle like this, and I hit profile normal, it's going to go out like that. Okay, but I want it to go the other way, and I want it to go straight. So I can say specify an axis. Let's go in the Z direction. There we go. So now we've just kind of gone straight with it in the Z direction. Okay, if I want to have more control over it, I can say free, and then this being 1, we'll take it in the positive Z direction. This being -1, we'll take it in the negative Z direction. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways we can control this, but a lot of things that we do in here, we can specify out here. Okay, if we realize I want this to go in the maybe a little bit in the Y direction too. There we go. So -1 in the Y, -1 in the Z gives me this. Maybe a little bit in the X. There we go. So now we're a little bit off to the X. Okay, you typically don't have to get into this much detail with it, but I just want you to see those options. Okay, because you can create some very cool things. It's just a matter of continuously playing with that. Okay, how else would you create this kind of shape without knowing how to play with those tools, right? You might spend hours trying to create it some other way. Okay, so those are going to be the three big ones, or four big ones: Revolve, Loft, Planar, and Extrude. The big thing with Revolve that we have to deal with, let's go to our Create CB Curve tool. We want to keep it on this line. Okay, we want to keep it flat. There we go. And when we use Revolve, it needs to know the direction. That's the big thing that's going to help us have some success in this. And if I look at the direction that it would rotate around, that's the one I would be using. So if I look at my channel box, I see that the rotate Y is the one that's rotating around. Okay, so then I would come over here and choose rotate Y. Okay, if I wanted this to go in a different direction, something like this, then I would say, okay, well, that's the X direction that's moving. So then I would rotate it around or revolve it around the X. So here's what X is going to look like. Here's what Y would look like. Here's what Z would look like, just for fun. Okay, and one of them is always going to be flat because of just how it's created. Okay, and then there's a free, just like we had in the other one, where you can specify some crazy axis, but I don't think I've ever really used that. In all of these, we're going to have a surface degree. We're going to have linear, where we can create these kind of blocky shapes. Even hitting 3 is not going to smooth it out. Or we have cubic, which will make it nice and smooth. We also have sweep angle. So if we didn't want a full one, we could use a sweep. We can play with the segments. Let me pull that up. You can see how many divisions are around here. If I needed more, you can see I can add more divisions in there. But just like polygons, we want to keep it as simple as possible and then add to the mix. Okay. So then we have a couple other ones. Those are all the ones under the surfaces menu that we're going to play with. We've gone in here, we've played with the attach curve. We've gone in here and played with the curve fillet. And I've shown basically a little bit of the rebuild. We'll get more into that. Okay. So let's go to, I'm just going to go to the CB curve tool and I'm just going to draw a shape. Actually, I'll keep it even simpler than that. Let me just go to create NURBS circle. Okay. And I'm just going to duplicate this up and just loft between these two. Okay, so now I've just created this kind of shape here. Okay, now if I right click on a NURBS surface, I don't get edge, vertex, face, UV. I get isoparm, control vertex, surface patch, surface point, surface UV, and hull. Okay, isoparms are these little blue lines. You can't move them. They're just for you to select. Okay, right clicking, going to control vertex. These are kind of like your vertices, but you'll notice that they're floating off the surface. That's just how they're created. Right click and go to surface patch. These are kind of like faces. I've never actually used this for anything, but it's there. Surface point, similar thing. I think I used it maybe once or twice. Surface UV, I've never actually used this, but it's there. And here is hull. Okay, and hull, there we go, is basically edge loop. Okay, so when we grab an edge in polygons and we double click it, that's what hull is. And I can scale this up. Scale up. You don't have to double click it, you just single click it. Okay, so I can grab those points and scale them up. And just like polygons, there's some similar modeling techniques in here, like grabbing these and squeezing them together and then kind of pinching that. You see the kind of surface I can create relatively quickly. So control vertex is going to be your big one for grabbing points and moving it around. And then hull is going to be for making it uniform across the entire surface. Okay, grabbing them all the way around. If we decided, okay, well, we have this edge here. I really want to define that and make it really nice and crisp. That's where isoparm comes in, because I can click here, shift click there, see how they're solid yellow and not dashed line yellow. I can go to edit NURBS, or edit NURBS, and then I can go to insert isoparms. And I'm going to say between selection, let's add 5 isoparms. And now I've added more divisions. I can go to the other side, this to that, edit NURBS, insert isoparms, between, yes. So now more isoparms means more points, means more hulls, means more divisions, more ability for us to kind of come in here and play with these things. Okay, so now I've added just a little bit crisper look right inside there. Okay, and I can go vertically as well. If I grab this one, shift click that one, and I go to edit NURBS, insert isoparms. There we go. And let's just say between this one and that one, I'm going to insert 5 more. So I just hit G to redo that. Now I can, if I want to insert 5 between this thing and then a little bit right here, I can drag one of these down, and then shift click that one, and then just go to the insert isoparms. Or I can click and drag one. Excuse me. I can drag one and go to insert isoparms, and it'll just insert the one right there. Okay? So now what I can do is I can go to control vertex, and I can say, okay, well, I'm going to grab these guys here, this guy here, this guy here, these 2 guys here, and I'm just going to grab, that's probably good. Okay? Make sure I don't have anything selected on the back side, just like polygons. We don't want to do that. I can go to move, and I'm just going to push this in. Okay, I've created just this little like dip inside the surface. That's something that obviously you can do that in polygons too, but it's pretty quick to do it inside NURBS and still maintain a fluid shape on here. With polygons, you really can't do that. You can see I have lots of divisions where I need them, and then back here I just don't have that many crazy amount of divisions. Okay. Here's the other cool thing we can do with a NURBS surface. Let me duplicate this, and I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees, shrink it down, move it up, scoot it over. There we go, something like that. Let's say I wanted these 2 surfaces to become attached. This is a battle gun, whatever, okay? And I want these 2 guys to be attached. You can't physically attach them inside a NURBS surface, okay? They wouldn't look like good at all. But what we can do is make it look like they're attached, which is important. So if I click on one, shift click the other, under Edit NURBS, there's a surface fillet in here, and there's a circular fillet. There's several things, but circular fillet is the one we're going to use probably the most. So we're going to go to the option box, and I want to just make sure that Create Curves on Surface is selected. And then here's a radius, okay? And just like the fillet radius we did for the curve, okay? We want to adjust this, and typically this is going to be low, like 0.1, 0.05, 0.025, 0.0125, okay, 0.0125, okay, something low like that. All right, so I'm going to start off at 0.1. I'm going to say fillet, and if I go into wireframe, you can see that there's a fillet here. Now that won't always be the case. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it ain't. If I come over to my channel box, there's a primary radius and a secondary radius. When it happens like this, most likely one of these guys has to be flipped around, okay? So the way that we flip it around is we make one of these negative. So I'm going to go to primary radius and make that negative first. Okay? And you can see that that didn't work. Okay? So let me go make the other one negative, 2. Okay? So now with both of these negative, it worked. So now if I come out here to shaded mode, you can see we have a nice little blend between these 2 surfaces. So if I click off, and I go to show NURBS curves to hide all these, you can see that these 2 surfaces look like they're blended together. It looks like it's created from the same shape. Okay, so very cool. On the inside, it doesn't. Okay, on the inside, we don't see that. And I could make another fillet on here. Edit NURB, surface fillet, circular fillet. Okay, go back here. I'll make the second one negative, negative 0.1. Okay, first one negative, second one positive. And that's kind of poking through. The big thing with NURBS is that we have to kind of crank up how they're displaying. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that right now, but I just increased the display on this just to make sure it looked good. And you can see that now I have a fillet here where it looks like it's blending, and a fillet there, which makes it look like it's blending. I could probably also take this one down. It could be this one just a lot higher than the other one. There you go. That's a little bit better. That makes a little bit more sense. Okay, so I can blend those, but keep in mind we only do what we need to. Okay, we don't need to see in here, so we wouldn't do something like that. Okay, I'm gonna put show curves back on again. All right, now when we get show curves, let's pretend that we were gonna see the inside of this. We don't want to see this piece kind of cutting through. So under Edit NURBS, I can go to the Trim tool. And no options in here that we need to play with. It's just set to keep. That's what we want. And I'm going to click on the part of this surface I want to keep. You may not be able to see it, but I'm going to click here, and there will be a little yellow diamond. Okay? These lines turn solid. These lines are dashed. Okay? And it's going to let me keep the stuff that's solid and delete the stuff that's dashed. I hit enter, and you can see how it did exactly that. It just clipped it and chopped it right off. Okay? Now let's pretend that I needed to see inside here. So I'm going to cut a hole inside there. So I'm going to click on this surface, go back to the Trim tool. Again, it turns into that white dashed line. I click on the part that I want to keep. I want to keep this. Okay, I can click 100 diamonds on here if I wanted to. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay, but you can see in this area that I want to get rid of, those lines are dashed. Hit enter, and now it's gone. So now I have this opening in here that allows me to go right through into this tube. Okay. Now we could put something just so we can see it better. I'll just put a sphere back there. All right, so now we can see the sphere right through that thing. Okay. This kind of thing is very difficult to do on a polygon object while keeping the rest of the surface smooth. Okay, it's doable. It's just a lot more difficult to do to keep that nice and smooth. And basically, just like our curve, if I were to try to move any of these pieces, it would most likely freak out and crash. So I'm going to save first, and then try to move one of the pieces. You can see how slow it's going. It's updating. Everything is updating here. You see how the fillet is moving with it. But at some point, it's going to not like what we're doing, and it's going to smack us in the face. There you go. See, we're here, and you can see how it's filleted there, but not filleted there. Okay? So it's basically saying, okay, well, this is nowhere near this surface. I can't fillet it. So as I pull this closer, we get the fillet. I'm surprised at how well this is doing compared to past experience with kind of moving stuff around after the fact. We could even rotate it. Oh, there we go. Maybe. Okay, I think we've officially broke it. Okay, that's the point. Keep it simple. Don't try to move these things around a lot. Let me just close Maya. I might still be trying to consider how to make the surface. I don't care. I'm just going to reopen it. Okay, but the point of that is that we kind of put it in position first, get our fillets on here, get them sized correctly. Okay, we want them smaller. We can always take this to negative 0.05 and make that smaller so it fits better. And just for fun, just take that up and up. All right. There we go. And then once we're there and we're happy with our shape, then we want to grab all our pieces and delete the history on it. Okay. And once we delete the history, then it's not going to try to calculate any of these things again. So then I can grab this and move it, and you see there's no lag. It's not updating, but that's fine because I don't need it to update, because I already have it in the exact position that I need it to be in. Okay? And because of that, because we delete the history so many more times on a NURB surface compared to a polygon, we want to keep saving an iteration. So this is test whatever. I want to maybe increment and save so that I would get the next version of this, which would be if I go to my open scene. You see how it saves as testing.0001 right there. Okay. And if I grab these and hit 3, you can see it looks like there's a lot of divisions on here, but if I go to control vertex, there's not a crazy amount. It's just showing me a crazy amount just because of how the surface is kind of handling its situation. Okay, so we did the trim tool. Okay, there's also an untrimmed surfaces. So if you realize I don't like the bevel on here or the fillet, I kind of want to reset this thing, we can grab our pieces and untrim them. And now we're back to where we were on here. Okay. Now when we do some of those undos, we're going to get these curves on the surface. Okay. And that's when we did our fillets, it created these in order for us to be able to trim it. Okay. In order for that trim tool to work, it creates these curves, basically outlining this is the area I want to cut off. Okay. So trim, untrim. There's also a booleans in here. I typically don't use this booleans either. If we run into a case where we need to use it, then we'll talk about it, but I'm not going to talk about it. There's an attached surfaces, and we don't need to go into it too in depth because we're not really going to get into it. It's a very specific type thing. Here's a NURBS plane. Here's another NURBS plane. I click both. I say attach surfaces. Keep originals. Turn that off. And I'm going to set this to blend. And you can see how it just takes these two surfaces and blends them together. But just like our curves, edit curves, attach curves, okay? If things are not lined up correctly, it's going to kind of freak out, okay? So blend is going to do that. Connect will simply go boop. It doesn't make the sound. You have to make the sound yourself. But that'll be that, okay? There's detach, align, open, close, move, seam. Insert isoparms we talked about. Offset surface we'll talk about as well. If I have this surface here and I want to give this some thickness, I can duplicate it and scale it down, but I'm not going to get a very good representation of that just because the surface isn't kind of a perfect type surface. Okay, it's kind of different proportions. So that's where offset surface would come in. And we used this a long time ago on Pac-Man. So I'm going to say offset distance. Right now it's set to 1, which is high. I'm going to set this to, I think, negative 0.05 offset. Oops, I actually want a positive 0.05 because I want it to go on the inside. Okay, and this creates a better representation of your surface. Okay, and it should be pretty even all the way throughout. Okay, so now I've offset this surface. And now let me hide my curves. Now I can grab these, and I can't just grab both of these and then just say Loft or anything like that. I have to go in here and just like we did on the Pac-Man thing, I'm going to hit F8. And then up here, where we have points, I'm going to turn the points off and turn isoparms on. I'm going to click this isoparm, shift-click that isoparm, and say Surfaces Loft. And now I've created a loft between those two surfaces. Okay. So I went to Edit NURBS Offset Surface just to give me the extra one. I grabbed the two isoparms, and then I went to Surfaces Loft and lofted those together. Okay, just like Rebuild Curve, there's a Rebuild Surface. There's a Round tool, which sometimes I use, but I haven't used it in a while. And then there's some other stuff inside here. We don't need to really worry about them too much. Okay. The cool thing about NURBS is that the Edit NURBS menu and the Edit Curves menu, if you look at them, duplicate surface curves, duplicate NURBS patch. Attach curve, attach surface. Detach curve, detach surface. Align curve, align surface. You can see how a lot of these tools are basically the same in both of these. Offset, offset, wherever it went. Okay, rebuild, rebuild. There's some like other tools inside here as well. But we don't need to get into every single tool. This assignment, we're not going to use every single tool. Okay. Hit F8 to get out of that. Delete. Good. Okay. So let me just save. I'm sure I guess I saved. And I'm going to go to a new file. And then we can actually start building this thing. So I'm going to switch to another lecture.